Go ahead and start, folks. Good evening and welcome to our webinar, Disinformation on the Internet and How It's Affecting the Fight Against Human Trafficking. My name is Lynn Flanagan. I'm the chair of STAT, which is an acronym for Soroptimist Together Against Trafficking. STAT began in 2011 when several Soroptimists met and decided to form a collaborative committee comprised of Soroptimists that would help raise awareness of human trafficking and provide education to the public about the problem. Our members represent 9 clubs in the San Diego County area. We have alliances with numerous providers in the county, law enforcement, the city and county attorney's offices, the Lawyers Club, and the San Diego Advisory Council on Human Trafficking. Before we introduce our panelists, I would like to remind you that this webinar is being recorded. We are honored this evening to have 3 stellar panelists join us this evening. And I'd like to talk about each one of them, give you a little biographical background. First of all, we have Dr. Jamie Gates. He is a professor of cultural anthropology in the Department of Sociology, Social Work, and Family Sciences at Point Loma Nazarene University. Dr. Gates is the former director of the university's Center for Justice and Reconciliation. He co-led the research project measuring the extent and nature of gang involvement in sex trafficking in the San Diego-Tijuana border region. He co-chaired the Research and Data Committee of the San Diego County Advisory Council on Human Trafficking and CSEC. He founded the Human Trafficking Research and Data Advisory Roundtable, which is also called HT-Radar for San Diego County. He co-led the university in establishing a scholarship fund for survivors of human trafficking. And he as well co-led the efforts to develop a drama-based peer-to-peer human trafficking awareness and prevention curriculum in San Diego middle and high schools called No More. Our second panelist this evening is Dr. Rebecca Coates-Nee. She's an associate professor at the School of Journalism and Media Studies at San Diego State. Dr. Nee has been teaching journalism and social media classes at State for more than 15 years. Her research centers around the problems of disinformation online, as well as how digital technologies are changing mass communication practices and audience behaviors. She holds a doctorate in educational technology from Pepperdine University and a master's in journalism from Northwestern University. Prior to entering academia, she was a television news anchor and reporter for more than 12 years at several network affiliates across the country. And our third guest panelist is J.W. August, and he's a freelance journalist. Since 1982, he has been covering San Diego as a reporter, editor, and producer for NBC7 and 10 News ABC. National, state, and local press and broadcast organizations have presented Mr. August with more than 125 awards. The National Press Club recognized him for consumer reporting, and the investigative reporters and editors recognized him for outstanding investigative reporting. Mr. August has won 33 Emmys for investigative reporting, writing, and journalistic enterprise. He is past president of the San Diego chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists. He is a board member of the Bilateral Safety Corridor Coalition. There will be plenty of time for the participants to ask panelists questions. I would just ask participants to please use the Q&A at the bottom of your Zoom screen for writing your questions. We will not be monitoring the chat screen, only the Q&A. We'd like to go ahead and move along with our guest speakers this evening. Dr. Gates, we'll begin with you.
And thank you very much for this opportunity and for all the work that you and your crew have done to organize this conversation. I'd like to share with everyone, as it was the summer of 2019 that QAnon came on our radar in the anti-trafficking circles. We had seen groups start to gather, new groups start to gather in San Diego County, doing protests carrying the anti-human trafficking signs, hashtag save the children. And they were new, not plugged into a very dense network of collaborators that have developed over the last 15 years. And everybody was asking, well, who are these folks? And we saw the combination of Q signs and anti-trafficking work, and it led us into starting to investigate what this was all about. I'm going to share a PowerPoint here with you all as a part of the conversation to kind of center us a bit. So I'm just going to take the next 10 minutes here to give a primer on QAnon as a conspiracy theory. It is a false set of ideas and conspiracies that have bled their way into a wide audience across the United States. We're not quite sure how large that audience is, but we think it's at least in the millions as we see the chatter online by the online evidence. So this hit really close to home at Point Loma Nazarene University. You may have seen the news a couple of weeks ago where a father was arrested for having killed his 2 young children. And the father was a graduate of Point Loma, running a Christian father, named a Christian father, which is of concern to our community, and who named QAnon as the source for his reasoning for killing his 2 children down in south of the border. So hit really close to home that this is not just a set of ideas and conspiracies that are online, but they've moved into the street. And I'll talk a little bit today about how they moved into the street to human trafficking. If you want to know QAnon, you can go back. I'm not going to talk through all of these things, but dig a little. The Pizzagate, some of you might remember Pizzagate. So this is the early beginnings of what QAnon becomes, 2016. Where a dedicated father, a devout Christian, a volunteer firefighter shows up with an automatic weapon to the basement of a pizza parlor in DC, looking to rescue children who were supposedly being trafficked. There was a series of online spaces where myths and hints and allegations, let's call them, about the ideas behind QAnon, how they became public. There's this, if you want to look up the history, 8chan, 4chan, 8kun, these were chat sites online where the ideas were first birthed, but then it quickly went from from obscure chat, sort of anonymous chat sites to public sites in 2017 and 2018. So Reddit, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, all were amplifying QAnon messages through their algorithms and through the sharing, and the sharing started to pick up speed in a significant way, particularly in 2017 and 18. It was certainly then also brought, the messages and even the symbolism of Q brought to the public's attention by dominant stream media. So Fox News, Sean Hannity, actors like Roseanne Barr, the more right-wing InfoWars, Alex Jones. And of course, in political rallies across 2018 and 19, Q was welcomed, even mentioned from the pulpit and the stage. Trump himself took the advantage to kind of mobilize and to support with words this growing, you might call it a conspiracy social movement. Of course, the pandemic then created the conditions where there's a whole lot more online activity, people sharing, and the sharing of the ideas and the symbolism of this underground conspiracy movement went from underground to very public. And at scale in a very short amount of time. A couple of writers in the Atlantic in 2020 called this the birth of a new religion. And I'll leave that up to our religion scholars to figure out if that's the case. If you look at the beliefs, the fundamental beliefs, I'll just highlight a couple of these. The fundamental belief behind Q is that there's a global cabal of pedophilic Hollywood celebrities and high-level politicians behind the scenes that are responsible for trafficking children. And there's different reasons why they say they're using children, but the idea is this global cabal, and they attach it to things like satanic rituals. And they name, in the Q literature and in the Q sharing of sites and in the images sent around, they name and blame people like Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, George Soros, you'll see here Oprah Winfrey, Tom Hanks, Ellen DeGeneres, certain Hollywood figures, even Pope Francis and Dalai Lama are looped into who is blamed for this cabal behind the scenes. The dominant rhetoric is around Donald Trump as savior. They definitely have this savior complex built into this, and this sense that there is a coming storm, a coming time when everything will be upended and things will be set right because everything is upended. The rhetoric of stolen election has also been at the core of their beliefs, and I'll share at the end here how they've been changing and morphing towards some other beliefs as well. You've probably seen these symbols. You've probably wondered a little bit. WWG, WW1, WGA, where we go one, we go all. The Q symbol, the Q with the snake. A lot of patriotic symbols blended in with these conspiracy symbols. And what's probably most concerning to those of us tonight is the blending with human trafficking, the kinds of symbolism you see in hashtag end human trafficking or hashtag save the children. I'll talk about that one more in a little bit. So if you think about how do they go about spreading the conspiracy? How has this happened? Q is thought of as this mysterious stranger with high political connections, but no one has fully authoritatively defined who that was. The HBO series Into the Storm, if you want to watch that, it's 4 different episodes, hour-long episodes. They come to the conclusion that it was Jim and Ron Watkins. Watkins is now in Arizona running for a political office. But it quickly went beyond these, like I said, these 4chan, 8chan cryptic sites, and people started to aggregate these messages and aggregate and interpret these messages into aggregate sites, and there became, you know what influencers are, right? So social media influencers who were promoting this theory started to pick that up. The method, it's propaganda. It's using images and fragments of comments and fragments of connections between political things and religious ideologies. Some have described the Q play that's online. It's like a game. Like you're supposed to search for the right correct interpretations of clues that this supposed Q puts out, and some sociologists have described them like alternative reality games or live action role play games. And there's real satisfaction having figured out the clue, and it's supposedly it's your own coming to knowledge of the truth behind the clue. But it's very directed, and it points people towards particular interpretations of their cues that match the overall conspiracy theory. Psychologists say it seems to be playing on human beings' tendency towards what they call apophenia, right? The tendency to perceive a collection or meaningful patterns of things between unrelated or random things, tie those together, and in a context where there's a lot of mistrust about what's happening, a lot of fear about what's next, a lot of fear of in a pandemic, and you have this perfect recipe for a conspiracy theory to go viral and to grow large. This theory thrives on ambiguity and adaptability, never being quite able to be nailed down to exactly what it is or who it is that's generating these ideas. You can look these up. This is what the Q drops look like, the earliest forms. So it's very fragmented pieces of information that became the basis for this much larger conspiracy theory. There's some research. I won't go through this in detail, but you can look it up, and I'll make this PowerPoint available that has the links to this research. There is ongoing research that shows that this wasn't just a function or factor of 2016 and 17, 18, but has moved into the 2020 and 2021 with considerable ongoing momentum. We are particularly, as Point Loma Nazarene University, we have a mostly Christian constituency and audience here. We're particularly concerned about the vulnerabilities in the Christian community, how the Christian community disproportionately, particularly the conservative evangelical Christian community, disproportionately has been sucked into, and pastors of those churches disproportionately have to wrestle with people whose Q beliefs mesh too easily with their Christian beliefs and have created real ideological and behavioral challenges in churches around the country. There's also this other sub-communities that are disproportionately affected, and Dr. Nee and I were talking about this notion of pastels and pedophiles, what came out in Bloom and Moscalen's research here, that there were female, women, influencers, yoga instructors, health instructors, moms groups, through Instagram accounts in particular, that picked up on the themes and the imagery of QAnon and their distrust of big government, their distrust of perhaps some of the same people that QAnon says we should mistrust, and it became some of the growth of the movement was fueled by everyday suburban white women in particular, and white women is pretty key here. If you can see, I'll just point out here that they make the point in the book that yes, it's cryptic information, yes, it's hard to believe information, but they say the outcomes of this whole game of deciphering what is turns out to produce some significant psychological comfort in the middle of what they feel is a lot of chaos. So more to be said there if we need in conversation in our discussion. So if you look though, the process in which QAnon comes to be seen by corporations as a real problem, as a disinformation campaign, took quite a while. So it wasn't until 2018 that Pinterest, Reddit started to ban messaging around QAnon. TikTok followed in 20. And it wasn't until 2020. TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Etsy, Twitter all started to ban messaging from this conspiracy theory. So corporations figured this was very dangerous to their brand, very dangerous to society, and so they were going to start to deplatform. Amazon took even longer. It wasn't until January 2021, of course, after QAnon was splashed all over the news on January 6th at the insurrection, that they banned messaging and really merchandising. So a deep part of Q has been fueling the Q movement has been a desire for merchandising off of those who can benefit from its imagery. I won't talk through this all, but law enforcement started to engage QAnon as a legal challenge or legal problem, especially as people were moving from online conversations into real world disruptions. And yet, go check out this 60-minute interview with former Department of Homeland Security leader Elizabeth Newman, who talks through their journey to wake up kind of late to the growing problem. The FBI had some beat on it, but they didn't really prioritize it back in 2019 even. Now it has a much higher priority on their lists, especially as it connects to white power movements and white supremacist movements in the United States. So there's this interesting tie between QAnon and whiteness and the white supremacist movements that is pretty strong. There's in fact as I point out here, the Department of Homeland Security is particularly concerned that white right-wing extremists and white supremacists are using QAnon as a bridge to recruit adherents because of some deep overlap in their ideologies. The costs and consequences more generally, but then let's talk really just and summarize quickly the costs and consequences to the human trafficking movement. Clearly, there's some real costs and consequences to society as a whole, but think about the cost to the human trafficking movement in particular. You remember seeing the hashtags in 2019, where are the children? Hashtag save the children. There was this real, I'm gonna break down the cost of the human trafficking movement into these 4 points. That QAnon and its misdirection and its misinformation co-ops the human trafficking movement to recruit people to its ideology and its broader agenda. QAnon misleads using false human trafficking statistics, usually overblown, but also misdirected in terms of who the population is that's being targeted and how large the target is and where this is actually happening. Politicizing, most of you know that working in the anti-trafficking movement for years now know that it's hard in any social movement to get support and buy-in from across the political spectrum and in an increasingly polarized world. QAnon polarizes the issue of human trafficking in very stark ways that tears at the fabric of the hard work that so many of us have done over the years to tie this issue across the political spectrum and make it something that we can agree on across the spectrum. And then finally, QAnon distracts with its messaging and imaging and its false care for children, distracts from the real work. And I'll show you a bit how that happens just in brief here. So using the hashtags literally drew attention, and you would think at the one level we all want more attention. Any attention is good attention to the issue of human trafficking, and people genuinely concerned about the exploitation of children have signed on through the QAnon channels, not knowing that they're being misdirected and misused. So the degree that we could co-opt those people into the movement and educate them on the real movement, that we would be saving them from real headache and the movement itself. The Facebook groups that we're organizing around QAnon trafficking have been dismantled, but there's still new social media spaces in which that's happening. Real live rallies that were held against human trafficking, the support and the volunteers that are generated out of those QAnon trafficking rallies weren't directed at the organizations that really needed the support and that are doing good work in San Diego. They were, in some ways, if they were drawing new members, they weren't pointing it towards where the real and the meaningful work was happening. So literally drawing resources away from the movement, the center of the movement. The statistics they were using and have used greatly overblown and misdirected. So arguing much larger numbers than what we have in any evidence of child trafficking in the United States, blaming it on immigrants, stoking xenophobia amongst immigrants, when we know that the bulk of human trafficking cases that we have in San Diego County, for example, we know are domestic trafficking victims and domestic traffickers. And there's politicians that were picking up on these exaggerated numbers and running with them as fact, and it's hard enough to, as researchers, to get an empirical handle on what's going on and to apply those metrics to good policy and good outcomes, and to muddy the water with the untruthfulness that's been spread by QAnon makes every researcher and every policymaker's work that much more difficult. I mentioned the politicizing, false claims targeting Democrats, false claims arguing that only a certain group of Republicans can do something about this, puts a wedge in the middle, a strong political wedge in the middle of a movement that we argue has taken a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to broaden and create deep ties across the aisle, and we refuse to be polarized by this movement. Unfortunately, mainstream politicians are using QAnon rhetoric and QAnon imagery and have had QAnon photo ops to support this. I'll say one more thing, and I think I'm running out of my time, so moderator, help me here. If you think about the cost to the movement beyond the immediate moment, I don't know if anybody saw this in the LA Times. Somebody, I think, who was a reporter here in San Diego for a while, Jean Guerrero, reported just this last week about how the Q conspiracy is now being used at the border with this photographer's named, creating false images or images of parents and their children and arguing that these children are being trafficked by these people, arguing that these aren't even their families, and shining even a bad light on our Department of Homeland Security, who are trying to do something to help make sure that these families are not harmed. And they're arguing that the US government is participating in protecting the traffickers and misdirecting from what actually is happening on the ground. So so when those of us that do care about the cross-border trafficking, they're muddying, the QAnon leaders are muddying the water for the recruitment and their own political gain. So there's more to be talked. We could talk about where it's going, what some of the new trajectories are. I will just mention there are now support groups. I'll say there's care and recovery groups. I can talk about those when we get to question and answer. But at this point, I'll leave it at this because I think I want to leave space for everybody else to get some of their facts out on the table. So I hope this was a helpful primer or introduction to the dangers of QAnon to the human trafficking movement.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Gates. That was very informative, and it certainly looks like you have more information to share, and that may come up during the question and answer session. We'll move on to Dr. Nee. Dr. Nee?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. This has been a fascinating experience already, as Jamie and I got to share some information that we wouldn't normally collaborate on. I haven't been studying social media from the aspect specifically of human trafficking, but right away when I was invited to be on this panel, I could see how this could have an impact, the disinformation campaigns on social media, how it could have a negative impact on organizations like yours that are legitimately trying to do some good work. So I was asked to talk just about how does disinformation spread and go mainstream, which as Jamie mentioned, it really has on social media. And when you look at the enormous growth that we've had since the early days of MySpace and Facebook back in 2004, 2005, over the past 15 years to where now 72% of all US adults use at least one social media site. So that's almost universal. And I like to say, I thought social media was a great idea. I love Twitter as a former news person. I thought it was so interesting for building connections and sharing news and information in the early cute toddler stages of social media. Unfortunately, now we have entered the dark teenage years, as I call it, of social media. So, you know, there's a lot of good I believe that social media does, but there's unfortunately a lot of room for darkness that we are seeing with these theories being spread. And we all, in a way, have to learn how to be journalists. We all have to learn how to practice what we call media literacy. And I have some points about that at the end, but I just want to go through quickly here. What platforms are Americans using? Jamie mentioned the dark spaces of the web, but most Americans now use YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. And when you think about it, Google owns YouTube. Facebook owns Instagram. So most of us are being fed information off these platforms that are owned by two very large tech companies. And what information are they feeding us? Well, many Americans are getting their news on social media, at least half say that they are, perhaps unintentionally or intentionally. But the real concern is, what about the news that you are being fed on your news feed that happens to make it to the top of the feed? How are you seeing that? How is it determined what you are going to see? When you think about mass media, which of course JW and I worked in, humans and editors are making decisions about what's going in your paper, your newspaper, or your local television show. And yes, they make mistakes. And yes, that's a whole other area of controversy. But generally, as a journalism professor, we teach ethical codes. There's a Society of Professional Journalists that teaches reporters and news organizations to follow the truth, to find out the truth, to fact check, to get both sides of the story. No, it's not perfect. But in general, most mainstream news organizations are attempting to be very transparent in how they are gathering information. On the other hand, with digital media, anyone can control the content. And it is decided by artificial intelligence, algorithms, what content you are most likely to see on your news feed. It is not chronological. It is based on how these tech companies have profiled you based on your behaviors online, the groups you belong to, the websites you've even clicked on, even when you're not on Facebook, for example. They can track all of that. Certainly comments you've engaged with. They have profiled you. If you have a Facebook account, you can go into your account. It takes a while to go down into ads and your interests, but you will see how they have profiled you down to whether you're a parent of a teenager and what your political beliefs are. So they're going to show you content that aligns with your biases and your views. And they're also going to show you the content that's going to be most sensational, because that's what tends to get shared the most and gets the most engagement. So those posts are boosted. And why is this happening? It's because these tech companies are funded through advertising. They are able to target based on demographics and your habits online. They're targeting information to you. That's how they make their money, by targeting information that they think you will agree with. So where does disinformation come in? Well, this is the academic definition, and this is a worldwide problem. These researchers at Oxford defined the degree of disinformation online. So the terms misinformation and disinformation a lot of times are used interchangeably, but with this definition, misinformation is more unintentional. The intent to harm is not as severe as the actual disinformation, like QAnon, like conspiracy theories, like propaganda spread online, that is fabricated, as Jamie said, taken out of context, audio, visuals, images manipulated to make you believe a certain thing that might match your personal biases. And then malinformation, we're not really going to talk about, but that's more deliberate attacking of individuals. Why are people creating disinformation campaigns? We know Jamie gave the history of QAnon a bit, but governments are doing this, are buying into this as well, particularly authoritarian governments such as Russia, China, Iran, with the goal of disrupting democratic practices, sowing that mistrust in government. And that, of course, is what we are seeing a lot with QAnon. You can't trust the government, you can't trust the media, this cabal of child sex ring is going on, and they're not telling you about it. They also want to discredit opposition candidates. So we saw a lot of this with Pizzagate in 2016, where the Russians were deliberately attempting to discredit Hillary Clinton. And then other people do it to make money because they get advertising money if somebody clicks on a fake story. They also might be trying to get donations as well. And some people just get their kicks by creating disinformation and watching it spread. Macedonia, teenagers in 2016 made a bunch of money by creating fake news sites and posting them to social media, causing them to go viral. When somebody clicked on the link, they got ad money, and they found out that the pro-Trump stories tended to work more than make more money than the pro-Hillary stories, so they continued with that. But that wasn't out of any kind of political ideology. The notorious agency in Russia, the Russian Internet Research Agency, really came into view in the 2016 US presidential campaign. They were also involved in disinformation campaigns for Brexit, leaving the European Union, again, sowing discord in democratic processes and trust in government. And they're creating false information and creating a network of bots that can help amplify these messages online. They even created two competing Facebook groups, one called the Heart of Texas in Texas, and another called United Muslims of America. And they established, they set up phony events at the same street corner at the same time, so these two groups would meet, and they were hoping that violence would ensue. To my knowledge, it did not, but they got a lot of Americans to sign up for these fake events. How it spreads online? Well, again, algorithms are targeting susceptible people. If you click on one of these stories, if you're a member of one of these groups, you're going to get hit more with this type of disinformation. Bots are fake accounts that help amplify these messages. Trolls tend to be humans who are also involved in these campaigns. Private messaging groups are a real concern of mine right now, like WhatsApp or even just group text messages, because there's generally like-minded people and there's nobody there to say, well, is that really true? Or what about this? Or bring out some of the problems with the theories. And then, as Jamie talked about, this growth of influencers, especially mom influencers who maybe even unintentionally think they're spreading this information and they don't understand that it's not true. There was a situation in India where somebody was actually killed because of a WhatsApp group message claiming that this guy was kidnapping children when he was not. The New York Times did a great story a few years ago about companies that actually specialize in creating fake people to make certain posts, again, to amplify them, to make them look more popular. and even add fake likes and comments. The Director of National Intelligence, however, found that the interference in the 2020 presidential election was not spread so much through bots because, as Jamie mentioned, Twitter and a lot of these platforms did a pretty good job taking them down, but they were spread by humans who actually believed what they were saying, some of them blue check verified accounts. We saw a lot of disinformation related to the pandemic. This is an example of this video, the plandemic, that YouTube did take down. But by the time the platforms got around to taking this information down, more than 8 million people had watched it. And I found this, Instagram has tried to take down the hashtags associated with QAnon, the obvious ones, hashtag QAnon. But this was just 2 days ago. I saw this Organic Mamas influencer just writing about over 6,000 children found, don't trust your government. And there's no person associated here, which makes it even more concerning. This was another post just a few days ago with a lot of those hashtags that Jamie mentioned. And I just wanted to wrap up by giving you some tips on how to spot disinformation online, because like I said, we all have to be reporters now. We all have to act as journalists. So these are some suggestions. You want to check the original source of the story or the image. Most legitimate news organizations have a reporter's name attached to the story. With disinformation campaigns, you can't find a person, you can't find the origin. And the same is true with images that are being doctored. You could do a reverse image search on Google. Are other media outlets reporting on the story? If not, then you might have a problem on your hand. Are legitimate nonprofit organizations confirming the story, like such as the one hosting us tonight? If not, then you should be suspicious of that. And are any hashtags being associated with that are associated with conspiracy theories being used? I'm still a big supporter of Snopes, started in San Diego by an attorney, a very reputable fact-checking site. And I urge you, don't share information if you can't confirm it. And please warn your family and friends and ask them not to do that as well. So try to speed through that as quickly as I can to give other people time. Hopefully that was helpful.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nee. And we'll move on to our last panelist, Mr. August. JW, you got the floor.
Thank you. Boy, that was terrific. It was like a semester there. Both of you were wonderful. If anybody didn't know about social media, the impact it's having, they do now. I have chased fraud for years. I've reported on for over 40 years. And I know fraud, and fraud hurts, has a cost to human trafficking in whatever form it does, particularly when they use social media to confuse people, to bring in money for their own causes. And it happens all the time. And I have actually got some cases I'd like to discuss with you that have happened in our community. First, though, it's important to understand that fraud is deception intended to result in financial or personal gain or reach some sort of advantage over somebody else. This involves people, what I call confidence men and women, confidence in that they're con men. I wish I had $1 for every time somebody said to me, but they seem so nice. Well, they do that on the internet too. They may seem nice, but their confidence, that's part of their persona. Confidence tricksters exploit victims' weaknesses. They perceive if you're naive, if you have a lot of compassion, maybe perhaps about trafficking issues, your vanity, your confidence, irresponsibility, greed. Credulity is a tool they use too. You know, that's when a person is willing or to accept something as the truth with the minimum amount of information. All of these help the confidence men. All of these help the rascals on the internet that provide the kind of information that is not helpful in the effort to prevent trafficking. It's, let me check here. Oh, let's see. If, for instance, you're an investigator or a donor, or someone checking out the information, when you run into one of these confidence men and women, there's some things you can do. In poker, we call it a tell. And if you're dealing with them face to face, you can see things like their eyes shifting. They don't look you in the face. They don't look in your eyes. Their Adam's apple will go up and down. I've seen this times when I've sat behind a TV camera and watched the people that we were grilling who would become very nervous. And even if they don't have those tells, the quickest way to find out is when you ask very specific questions and they can't give you a straight answer. You ask the question again in another way, and you get another answer that they want to give you and not what the reality is. There are a number of different frauds, scams, but I'm going to focus on two that are relevant to trafficking. First, it's the victim who is not a victim. No doubt there are young girls and boys lured, seduced, or kidnapped, but surprise, many of those claims are phony and they hurt the movement, the anti-trafficking movement. These people are looking for money, fame, or fortune, or free ride. One case in particular I'm thinking of is Chong Kim. Paula, can you put her up? Chong had a movie made about her. The appeal of a young girl sold into sex trade creates instant interest. In her case, instant celebrity. She became a celebrity. She filled banquet rooms across the country, raising money for the cause, claiming she was an underage girl sold into sex slavery by a criminal enterprise. National media bid on the story, as they often do. So did the locals. Her tears shaking on the stage, a Netflix movie, you can change it. She had all of this going on. After her visit to San Diego, I began checking on her story. There's another picture of her. With the help of an NGO out of Florida, and it didn't take long to tag her as a phony, even though even the New York Times wrote about her and Netflix did a movie on her. She was an opportunist, not the first and not going to be the last. I tracked her back to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and got the high school where she graduated from to send me a copy of the yearbook, which revealed who she really was and where she was from, and the whole story kind of unraveled. She is, like many people that do this, a good liar. And that's difficult for people to take care of trafficking victims, because you have to ascertain, are they the real deal or are they just a phony? The next are confidence men and women. Oh, there's a shot of her from the movie. Let's move on to the next picture. That's of Lady Katrina Petro Torbell. There she is, outside of a restaurant in Del Mar. She's what I call a grifter. They are friendly, considerate, well-mannered, and charm you into feeling a personal consideration, a personal connection. And they always have a hook to ensnare you. In this case, Lady Torbell, her title was Lady because she said European nobility gave it to her. She was charming, I've read, and she charmed a manager at Chipotle's to allow her to set up shop there in the Chipotle's in Flower Hill Mall, telling everybody who was there that would come in, there she is again, that she was trying to raise money for a home for victims, that there wasn't any homes for that. As often I've heard before, that's a common scam. We're going to put a home in for the victims and we need your money. I didn't need much research. 3 years earlier, the Save Rancho Santa Fe woman was part of a scam claiming to be heir to the Guggenheim family. It was all over the East Coast media, Times, there it is. There's a story when she got busted. When she was claiming she had ties to the Guggenheim family and access to millions of dollars in diamonds, and had a connection with Coke and vodka, that she could sell this to, she could sell this vodka franchise to Coca-Cola. It was all baloney. I confronted her. She said, I was interviewing her, and she started getting nervous. And anytime you, as I explained to you earlier, if you begin asking specific questions again and again, you keep getting different answers, you know something's up. She said, excuse me, I have to go to the ladies' room. She walked around into a store nearby. I kind of followed behind her. And when I got to the store and looked in, she was springing out the back door, jumped in her Mercedes and ran off. Eventually, the DA popped her. She did get arrested for this. But that's, so these fancy titles mean nothing. And that's what the next grifter does. And if we can put his up, if you will. This is a current grifter. And it's somebody the whole community should be aware of. He claims to be a pastor with no church. That's him on the left, or congregation. But he does have an IRS he has IRS status as a religious organization. His name is Travers. He is a licensed private investigator in the state. Unlike Lady Katrina, though, he is still raising money, lots of money. He has, in the past few years, been able to buy a nice big home in the North County, got a gift of a 35-foot luxury RV paid for by the county for his operations. The person that pushed that for him was Kristen Gaspar, a supervisor of Friends of, I wouldn't say friends, but a strong supporter of Trump. And this man, Travers, has spoken at events at the Trump Hotel in DC and done Trump events in this area, bringing his county 35-foot RV to the events. His brainchild is called Saved in America, and it's raised a great deal of money. Now he wants more. His website details a gala on November 4th at the U.S. Grant. I'll repeat that again. A gala at the U.S. Grant on November 4th. The previous ones in Vegas and La Jolla. There it is. Can you click on it? Oh, she's good. There it is. That's it. That's the fundraiser. Always has some innocent white girl on the front when he's trying to get money from people. His previous ones in Las Vegas and an earlier one in La Jolla raised over 150 grand. His hook has been finding retired cops and Navy SEALs, getting them to join his organization in exchange for a private investigator's license. Can you imagine? Oh, I've got these Navy SEALs, want to rescue these kids. It had a great, that's the hook. That he's been able to do this for 4 or 5 years and continue to do it. He's made claims of hundreds of rescues, which are questionable at best. He does have a mother of one victim he uses at his galas, but will not allow me to interview her. His website lists supporters, some who think he's a hero, others think otherwise. His rescues convinced HBO, NBC, the Union Trib, and others to initially write glowing reviews. But the bloom is coming off the rose, I hope. One California senator endorsed him initially, but as his office told me, that's before they knew what they know now. And it's important you know about this now. Actually, the people sponsoring this event gave him money initially, and he claimed them as a supporter. And when they stopped supporting him, he wouldn't take it down. That's what he does. He does not, keeps these impressive names attached to his organization when in fact they're not. Let's go down to our partners. Well, donors gave money, but our partners are like relationships with them. You see, if you go down, all of this is baloney. Most of it's baloney. The Texas Association of Licensed Investigators told me they're done with the guy. They don't have anything to do with them. Valley Center is where he lives now, and he's trying to use that relationship to build him up. I've contacted Navy about the Special Warfare Center. He claims that the Navy SEALs support his organization. Rotary International has told them to take their name off of here. And on and on. See the Bibles for Marines? That's he's such a hypocrite. He is a pastor with no church, and Bibles for Marines sounds very nice, but that's his organization. He listed on his website as a supporter. Bibles for Frogmen, that's him again. And PCI has nothing to do with this guy, and on and on. So now you get a feel for what this guy's like. You get a feel like this guy is better than most of the people doing this. A very clever man, but he has taken a lot of money out of the community. And I know a lot of NGOs would like to have the money that he spends in Las Vegas and elsewhere enjoying life. That's my wrap. I got fired up, didn't I? I'm just very disturbed about somebody getting away with this. When I think about all the people that could use money in the movement, and this guy's living high on the hog, and he continues to do it. He's got Trump's appointee for the border, not the border patrol, for the border patrol, the temporary appointee that Trump put in there, coming as his speaker. It's guest speaker, it's top speaker. He has a lot of connections to the Trump people, and I'm still trying to sort that out. Thanks, Lynn.
Thank you so much, Mr. August. We do have some time for questions, so please be sure to type in your question using the Q&A function. And if you wish to direct a question to a particular panelist, please indicate so in your message. So let me take a look and see what we got. Give me a second here. Okay, there is one question. I'll give you the first one. Do you think that Fox News and network follows these ethics that you present? I know that a couple of our panelists may have already weighed in on the Q&A portion. Do you mind sharing your thoughts on that, panelist?
Yeah, I did answer. I just simply no, I do not, because I think it was that question was asked when I was speaking. That's what makes it difficult. I understand it's difficult for the audience to discern what is opinion journalism, what is entertainment, because essentially Fox News is presenting entertainment, particularly with their hosts in the evening. Tucker Carlson was sued for libel, and his lawyers were able to get the case dismissed because they said that it's an entertainment program and nobody could possibly believe what he's saying. So as Jamie said, this is definitely, these propaganda theories are being amplified by right-wing media. What I'm talking about is the mainstream media, newspapers, local TV. Unfortunately, their budgets are being cut. We don't have enough J.W. August to do deep investigative work anymore. But on the whole, especially if a number of outlets have confirmed a story, you're going to get more factual information than somebody spouting something off as opinion, or something that you find online that is completely anonymous and you don't have a person's name attached to it.
Oh, I have something I'd like to say. It's interesting that Travers, the last gen I'm talking about, if you go to his website and see his media coverage, you see that Newsmax, Breitbart, One America, all alt-right organizations are always giving them free FaceTime all the time. And also does KUSI. Whatever he does, they get him on there. To me, that should be some kind of a hint at who his ties are. And as I said, I'm exploring that further.
Okay, there was one question that came in. Is Mr. Travers licensed as a PI in California and Texas?
California, yes. No, I don't think so in Texas. They've kicked him out of the organization. I got a letter back from him. They actually asked him to get out and take him off the site, and he continued to leave it up. And so I had to kind of go back to him and say, he's still using you as a, and as you saw, he still is. Convention doesn't matter to him or the people behind him.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I'll also put in a word here. I think Dr. Nee brought this up earlier, that in her suggestions for how to combat misinformation, and that is, Travers came into the San Diego networks and started to fundraise, started to promote his particular brand of anti-trafficking work. There were hardly a key member of the network that didn't raise an eyebrow and raise a question, and then who chose not to come alongside and support. Early on, there was sort of general, okay, maybe these are military guys who could serve a particular niche function in the movement, but very quickly it became, we didn't know it was all false necessarily, but we knew that by the rhetoric and by the methodologies they were putting forward, something wasn't right. And so I think to highlight Dr. Nee's suggestion is that we go to the core of the network of people. And so for anti-human trafficking, if you've not connected around the Advisory Council on Human Trafficking, You can find people who've been involved in this work for 15, 20 years, and you start vetting your organization or your ideas around to that group, you'll get a lot of communal wisdom that will help us prevent from walking down supporting groups that are absolute trash.
Good point.
Okay. Another question for all our panelists. Conspiracy theorists used to be fringe elements of our society. Now they are virtually mainstream. What can we do to combat this disinformation? As individuals, what can we do? Would anyone like to answer that?
Well, and Dr. Gates was just chiming in there. I think the list of tips that I gave there at the end of my very quick presentation, but again, verify, try to find the original source. If there is no name attached, sometimes the disinformation and it is mainstream now, and I think I explained why, because it's proliferating, not just in the dark corners of the web, but on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. But if a lot of times you'll click on some of these senseless stories and you'll see a fake like newspaper type of site. And if you look in the about section, it will say in fine print, we do not stand by, this is for entertainment. We don't stand by anything that is published here. And you won't see that on the San Diego Union Tribune. You know, generally legitimate journalists will stand by their reporting and they will correct it if it turns out to be false. So that's one major way considering the source. But then as Dr. Gates was just saying, you know, do the nonprofit organizations that are legitimate, are they endorsing this type of story, whatever it may be? And if not, then there's probably, you know, not a lot of truth to what you're seeing. And don't share it if you can't confirm it. Don't share it. I still think Snopes is one of the first stops I will always go if I find something suspicious online, and they're very quick about you know, detailing whether it's factual or not, or just somewhat misleading.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Nee. We have another question, a suggestion from a participant. Maybe there should be a reporting hotline for this. Do you think that would be helpful?
Well, there is a reporting hotline for trafficking, but I'm not sure. What do you mean reporting what? Lies?
Disinformation, yes.
Well, good luck with that one. That'd be tough. I'm not sure if there's a reality. Who would edit it? Who would pay for it? That's
well, true. You have to have
I'd be glad
sponsors.
I do think that the organizations that Dr. Nee mentioned, Snopes and PolitiFact, are good to contact. If you need it, then send them your data, because that helps bolster their research.
I really, really suggest that you block and report on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. There is a mechanism for doing that you have to click on the 3 little dots, and it will ask you why are you reporting this, and you say that this is not true. That's the only way, that's the only power we really have as users of social media to report this type of disinformation that's out there.
Yeah, it's like you said, we have to be our own. Everybody's got to be a journalist now. We all have to. We all have to check out these claims.
Well, it comes down to personal responsibility and willingness to not believe everything you hear. We have another question. Someone mentioned that she recently watched the HBO special on QAnon. How did trafficking become one of their main narratives? Why do you think they're using that?
I'd be happy to jump in there briefly. So the narrative of children being kidnapped and used or trafficked and used for their body part, for bloodlust, for sacrificial reasons, is a very old trope, a very old story that was used by white supremacist groups against Jewish groups and throughout the 20th century. It's not new. It's being recycled. You can find it in some of the white supremacist handbooks on this particular narrative. The concern around human trafficking has now become in the media in the last probably 10 years in particular. There's been a very intentional push by us all to bring more awareness. Now it's on everybody's radar. So it's an easy pivot. Who doesn't care about human trafficking victims? Who doesn't care about the most vulnerable in our community? So I think it's one of those sort of hyper sensational issues that catches everybody's attention, and it's easy to tag sympathy to. But when you co-brand it with your own conspiracy theory, then it makes that conspiracy theory seem legit.
Thank you, Dr. Gates. Dr. Nee, did you have any comments about that?
No, I just wholeheartedly agree that, as I said, the algorithms are going to bring up the most sensational claims. And I think maybe even some of these mom bloggers don't understand, the mom influencers don't understand that what they're spreading is false information. But that anytime you mention kids, that gets a lot of attention. And unfortunately, we just have to do more to get the word out that that this is not a legitimate cause. What you folks are doing is.
Okay, Mr. August, did you have any comments about that?
They both nailed it.
Okay, thank you. Another question. I'll direct this to you, Mr. August. Have people been reporting Saved in America to the IRS?
That's a good place to go, because if you look at his tax forms that everybody can see, there's some funny business going on with Saved in America. And he actually runs an outfit called the National Christian Intelligence Network, which the Saved in America is under, and the money moves around. And it's actually been reported, Jeff McDonald reported that part in the UT, and whether the IRS is acting or not, I do not know. They move at their own pace. I can say this, the state attorney general in California had this case 2 years ago. We've had 3 attorney generals since then. And it bothers me that this man continues to do this, take money out of the system. And I know it takes time for law enforcement to move, but I think the 3 attorney generals up in Sacramento have just buried this thing, and nobody's going to pay attention to it unless we get some help from local authorities.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, it's just a little past 7 o'clock. We're going to go ahead and end our webinar tonight with everyone. And on behalf of STAT, I'd like to thank our 3 panelists, Dr. Nee, Dr. Gase, and Mr. August, for your enlightening presentations. I'd like to thank all the participants who joined us tonight to take time out of your busy day. And a special thanks to our generous donors. If you wish to make a donation to STAT, just go to our website and follow the instructions. We would also like to announce, while we're at the webinar tonight, that we've already scheduled our STAT Salutes Our Mission Heroes. It's an annual event, and we booked it for Friday, March the 4th, 2022. There will be a lot more details to follow, and so please put it on your calendar. Just save the day. We are taking nominations for heroes. If you would like to nominate a hero, please check out the guidelines on our website and complete the form. Folks,